The story of the Ninth Legion, Legio IX Hispana, begins in the turbulent days of the Roman Republic, when Julius Caesar was reshaping the political and military landscape of the Mediterranean world. Around 65 BCE, Caesar raised several new legions to secure his campaigns in Gaul and beyond. Among them was the Ninth, which would later become one of the most storied and mysterious units in Roman history. From the start, the Ninth fought in some of the most brutal battles of Caesar's Gallic Wars. The legion gained a reputation for resilience, enduring long marches, harsh winters, and bloody confrontations with Celtic tribes who fought fiercely to protect their homelands. Caesar himself mentioned the Ninth in his Commentarii di Bello Gallico, where he praised their discipline and courage in the face of overwhelming odds. For the soldiers, loyalty to Caesar and to Rome was absolute. Desertion was nearly unthinkable, and cowardice was punished with merciless severity. After Caesar's victories in Gaul, the Ninth followed him across the Rubicon in 49 BCE during the Roman Civil War. They fought at key battles such as Pharsalus, helping to secure Caesar's dominance over Pompey and his supporters. These campaigns further cemented the Ninth's reputation as a reliable and hardened force capable of executing complex maneuvers and holding their ground in the chaos of battle. By the time Caesar declared himself dictator, the Ninth had already carved its name into Roman military history. But the loyalty of a legion was not to Caesar alone. After his assassination in 44 BCE, the Ninth continued to serve under his successors. They fought for Augustus, Rome's first emperor, in the wars that followed the fall of the Republic. Under Augustus, the legion was stationed in Spain for many years, earning the title Hispana, the Spanish Legion. It was here that they fought against the Cantabrians, a fierce people of northern Spain, in a brutal war that lasted nearly a decade. The Cantabrian Wars were marked by guerrilla tactics, ambushes, and relentless resistance. The Ninth proved its toughness, enduring not only combat, but also starvation and disease in the mountainous terrain. By the end of the Cantabrian campaigns, the Ninth had solidified its reputation as one of Rome's most battle-hardened units. The title, Hispana, was not just a geographical note, it was a badge of honor, a reminder of years of blood and sweat spilt in the name of Roman expansion. The legion had become an instrument of empire, a tool used by Rome to impose order on its ever-expanding frontiers. At its height, the Ninth was made up of about 5,000 heavily armed legionaries, supported by cavalry and auxiliaries from conquered provinces. Each soldier carried a gladius, the short sword that was the hallmark of Roman infantry, along with a large rectangular shield and javelins for the opening phase of combat. More than weapons, however, they carried the legacy of their victories. Veterans of the Ninth could walk proudly through Rome, their service etched into the very foundations of the empire they had helped to build. The rise of the Ninth Legion was a story of triumph, endurance, and loyalty to the Roman cause. Yet, behind this glory lay the seeds of a mystery that would puzzle historians for centuries. For while the Ninth had become one of the most respected units in Rome's military machine, its fate would ultimately be unlike any other, an entire legion that, at some point in history, simply vanished.
The year was 43 CE, when Rome turned its gaze toward the misty, untamed island of Britain. Julius Caesar had briefly invaded a century earlier, but his expeditions were more symbolic than permanent. It was Emperor Claudius who finally launched a full-scale invasion, determined to expand the empire's borders and to secure personal glory. Among the legions dispatched across the Channel was the battle-hardened Ninth Legion, Legio IX Hispana. For the soldiers, it meant venturing into a land of thick forests, wild weather, and fierce tribes who had no intention of submitting to Rome. From the moment they landed, the Ninth faced challenges unlike anything they had seen in Spain or Gaul. Britain was a patchwork of tribes, each led by its own chieftain, and while some tribes cooperated with Rome, many resisted bitterly. The legions found themselves fighting not on open plains, but in marshes, hills, and dense woodlands, where ambushes were common and supply lines vulnerable. The Celts of Britain were skilled in guerrilla warfare, striking quickly with chariots or spears before vanishing into the trees. Still, the Ninth carried Rome's military machine forward. They helped establish forts, roads, and garrisons as the empire slowly extended its control south of the Thames. Every mile conquered was secured by Roman engineering. Bridges were built, camps fortified, and roads laid down in the straight, enduring style for which Rome was famous. For the legionaries, each campaign was grueling. They marched in heavy armor, often through rain and mud, only to fight desperate battles against warriors painted with woad, their bodies marked with symbols meant to terrify. The Ninth played a critical role in suppressing resistance. One of their most famous trials came during the revolt of Queen Boudica in 6061 CE. Boudica, the warrior queen of the Iceni tribe, led a massive uprising against Rome after her family was brutalized and her lands seized. Her army, tens of thousands strong, swept through Roman towns, burning Londinium, modern London, and slaughtering thousands. The Ninth, stationed in Britain at the time, marched to confront her forces. But the encounter proved disastrous. A large detachment of the legion was ambushed and nearly annihilated. Only a few survivors escaped to tell the tale. The defeat at the hands of Boudica was a devastating blow to the Ninth's reputation, but it was also a turning point. Reinforcements were sent, and other Roman legions eventually crushed Boudica's revolt. Yet the scars of that disaster lingered. The Ninth had tasted the full ferocity of Britain's tribes, and their confidence was shaken. Still, Rome was not a power to retreat easily. Fortresses such as Eboracum, modern York, were built in the north, where the Ninth would be stationed for decades to come. From there, they would patrol the frontier, facing endless skirmishes with tribes beyond the reach of Roman authority. Britain was unlike any province Rome had conquered. The wealth was limited, the climate harsh, and the resistance unyielding. For the soldiers of the Ninth, it was a posting that promised hardship more than glory. Yet it was here, in the windswept lands of the North, that the legion's fate would ultimately be sealed. What began as a march of conquest would over time transform into one of history's greatest mysteries, the disappearance of an entire Roman legion.
When we think of the Roman legions, we often imagine grand battles, gleaming armor, and banners flying proudly in the wind. Yet for most soldiers of the Ninth Legion, daily life was far less glorious. It was a routine of discipline, construction, and endless preparation, punctuated by moments of brutal combat. The strength of Rome did not rest only on battlefield victories, but on the relentless discipline and order maintained in the lives of its soldiers. A typical Roman legionary was recruited between the ages of 17 and 20. Once enlisted, he committed himself to years of service, at least 25, often longer. The oath of loyalty, the sacramentum, bound him not just to Rome, but to his comrades and commanders. Breaking this oath was considered dishonorable and punishable by death. The legion was a soldier's family, and its standards, or signa, were symbols to be defended with one's life. Training was relentless. Soldiers of the Ninth drilled daily, marching long distances with full packs that could weigh up to 30 kilograms. They practiced throwing the pilum, a heavy javelin, and striking with the gladius, the short stabbing sword designed for close combat. Wooden weapons were used for training, deliberately heavier than real ones, so that in battle a soldier would feel faster and stronger. Discipline was harsh. Laziness, drunkenness, or cowardice were met with floggings, fines, or worse. The infamous punishment of decimation, in which every 10th man of a disgraced unit was executed by his comrades, ensured that no soldier took his duty lightly. When not fighting, the men of the 9th spent much of their time building. They constructed roads, bridges, and fortifications, turning the wilderness of Britain into a landscape dotted with Roman engineering. A marching camp could be set up in a single day, complete with defensive ditches and palisades. Fortresses like Eboracum were complex structures with stone walls, barracks, granaries, and baths. Every soldier became not only a warrior, but also a skilled laborer, capable of shaping the land itself to Rome's will. Life in the forts was organized and disciplined. Soldiers slept in barracks, 10 men to a room, with shared duties such as cooking, cleaning, and maintaining equipment. Meals were simple: bread, porridge, cheese, and occasionally meat, often supplemented with wine or sour beer. Pay was modest, but opportunities for loot or land upon retirement offered incentives to endure the hardships. Camaraderie was essential. Soldiers lived, trained, and bled together, forging bonds that were stronger than blood ties. Despite the order, life on the frontier was filled with tension. Beyond the walls of the fort lay hostile tribes who resented Rome's presence. Raids and ambushes could occur at any moment. The soldiers knew that their position in Britain was precarious, and that at any time a revolt like Boudicca's could erupt again. Nights were spent on guard duty, eyes scanning the forests and hills for signs of movement. For the men of the 9th, life was a balance between the monotony of routine and the sudden terror of battle. Their existence was not glamorous, but it was vital to the survival of Rome's empire in Britain. Every road they built, every fortress they manned, was a reminder of their presence at the edge of the known world. Yet even as they carried out their duties with discipline and loyalty, few could have imagined that this very frontier would one day become the stage for their mysterious disappearance. By the early 2nd century CE, the 9th Legion had been stationed in northern Britain for decades. Their fortress at Eboracum, today's city of York, served as both a military stronghold and a symbol of Roman authority in the region. From here, patrols were sent north into the lands of the Caledonians and other hostile tribes. The legion's presence was meant to secure the frontier, yet it also placed them at the very edge of Rome's power, far from the heart of the empire. The last clear record of the 9th appears around 108 CE, when inscriptions in Britain still mention their activities. After that, the evidence begins to fade. By approximately 120 CE, the 9th is no longer listed in official Roman documents. Later military records, which carefully enumerate the legions stationed throughout the empire, make no mention of Legio IX Hispana, a unit that had served Rome for more than a century, fought in Caesar's campaigns, marched in Spain, and bled in Britain, suddenly vanishes from history. This silence puzzled ancient historians and has continued to baffle modern scholars. Roman bureaucrats were meticulous record keepers. They documented victories, defeats, deployments, and even mundane details of daily administration. For an entire legion of 5,000 to 6,000 men to disappear from the written record suggests something extraordinary happened. But what? The first theories emerged as early as the Renaissance, when scholars began piecing together the fragments of Roman history. Some believed that the 9th had been wiped out in Britain, destroyed in a catastrophic battle against northern tribes. Others suggested that the legion had been redeployed to another province, perhaps in the east,
where it later perished in obscurity. The lack of consensus turned the ninth into one of history's great enigmas. Part of the difficulty lies in the contradictory evidence. On the one hand, inscriptions from Britain in the early 2nd century seem to be the last concrete proof of the legion's existence. On the other, later fragments found in the Netherlands and even in the Danube region hint that at least parts of the ninth may have survived beyond Britain. Yet these fragments are incomplete, leaving room for speculation and doubt. Archaeology has done little to resolve the mystery. Excavations at Eboracum reveal the outlines of the fortress, but no mass graves or signs of sudden destruction that would indicate a legion's annihilation. Nor have historians found definitive records in other provinces linking the ninth to later battles. Instead, we are left with shadows, hints of their presence, whispers of their fate, but never certainty. The mystery only deepens when considering the context of the time. The early 120s were turbulent years in Britain. Revolts among northern tribes were frequent, and Roman control was fragile. Around the same time, Emperor Hadrian ordered the construction of Hadrian's Wall, a massive fortification meant to mark the empire's limit in the north. Was the wall built because the ninth had been destroyed in a disastrous campaign, serving as a grim lesson in the limits of Roman power? Or was it simply a strategic measure unrelated to the legion's fate? Whatever the truth, the disappearance of the ninth marked the beginning of a legend. From this point on, their story becomes less history and more mystery, a puzzle that continues to fascinate and divide historians. The Ninth Legion, once a proud force of Rome, had crossed into the realm of myth. Among all the theories about the fate of the Ninth Legion, the idea that it was destroyed in Britain is perhaps the most dramatic and widely accepted. Britain in the early 2nd century was a land of constant unrest. The Romans controlled much of the south, but the north was wild, mountainous, and inhabited by tribes who fiercely resisted imperial rule. To march into these territories was to enter hostile ground, where ambushes could happen at any moment, and where Rome's discipline was tested to its limits. The British hypothesis suggests that sometime around 117 to 120 CE, the ninth was ordered to push north, perhaps to suppress a tribal revolt, or to establish new forts in Caledonia, the region that is now Scotland. Roman strategy often required legions to project power into dangerous areas, both to intimidate enemies and to secure trade routes. For the ninth, already weakened by previous losses in the Boudiccan revolt decades earlier, such a mission could have been perilous. Imagine the scene. Columns of Roman soldiers marching through dense forests, their armor clanking, their standards raised high. The rain falls endlessly, soaking their cloaks. The terrain is unfamiliar, the locals hostile. Then, without warning, tribal warriors erupt from the hillsides and tree lines, attacking with spears, swords, and chariots. The Romans form up in their disciplined ranks, shields locked in the testudo formation, but they are outnumbered. The battle drags on, supplies dwindle, and eventually the ninth is surrounded and crushed. This scenario is supported by circumstantial evidence. Around 122 CE, Emperor Hadrian visited Britain and soon after ordered the construction of Hadrian's Wall, a vast defensive barrier stretching across the island from sea to sea. Some historians argue that the wall was built in direct response to a devastating loss, perhaps the destruction of the ninth. The wall symbolized Rome's decision to halt expansion and instead fortify what it already held. Further evidence comes from the silence of Roman records. If the ninth had been transferred elsewhere, one might expect to find inscriptions or documents mentioning them. But if they had been annihilated in a distant, shameless defeat, it is possible that the empire chose to erase their name, avoiding the humiliation of acknowledging such a loss. Rome was not above rewriting history to protect its image of invincibility. Archaeological evidence, however, is frustratingly elusive. Excavations in northern Britain have uncovered traces of battles and burned settlements, but no clear sign of an entire legion's destruction. No mass graves, no definitive artifacts bearing the mark of the Ninth. This absence fuels skepticism, leading some scholars to doubt the theory. Yet it is important to remember that battle sites can vanish over time, and the land may still conceal secrets beneath its soil. The British hypothesis remains compelling because it fits the broader context. Britain was unstable, Hadrian's Wall followed soon after, and the Ninth was last recorded in this very province. To many, the simplest explanation is that they marched north and never returned. In this version of events, the legion's disappearance is not a mystery, but a tragedy. Thousands of Rome's finest soldiers swallowed by the mists of Britain, their fate sealed by the indomitable resistance of its tribes.
While the British hypothesis offers a dramatic image of the Ninth Legion perishing in the misty hills of northern Britain, another school of thought points in a completely different direction: the East. According to this theory, the Ninth did not vanish in Britain at all, but was redeployed to a distant province of the empire, only to meet its end against Rome's most formidable eastern enemies. Evidence for this theory begins with scattered inscriptions. Some fragments discovered in Nijmegen in the Netherlands suggest that detachments of the Ninth may have been stationed there in the early 2nd century, after their supposed disappearance from Britain. If true, this would mean that the legion was not destroyed in Britain, but instead relocated closer to the Rhine frontier, perhaps as part of a strategic reshuffle of Roman forces. From there, it may have been transferred further east. The eastern frontier of the Roman Empire was a dangerous place in the early 2nd century. Beyond the Euphrates River lay the Parthian Empire, Rome's great rival. The Parthians were masters of mounted archery and swift cavalry tactics, capable of humiliating Rome in open battle. Only a few generations earlier, the Romans had suffered one of their worst defeats at Carrhae in 53 BCE, when thousands of legionaries were cut down by Parthian horsemen. The memory of that disaster still haunted the empire. Some historians propose that the Ninth was sent east during the reign of Trajan, who launched a massive campaign against the Parthians between 114 and 117 CE. In this version, the legion may have been caught in one of the many violent uprisings that erupted during the campaign, or was wiped out in a confrontation with Parthian forces. Others suggest that the legion survived Trajan's wars, but was later destroyed during the reign of Hadrian, when fresh revolts shook the eastern provinces. One intriguing clue comes from an inscription found in the city of Antioch in Syria, dating to the mid-2nd century. While the evidence is disputed, some scholars argue that it references veterans of the Ninth. If accurate, it would suggest that at least part of the legion made it to the east. Yet, as with so many aspects of the Ninth story, the evidence is fragmentary and open to interpretation. The Eastern hypothesis has its appeal. It explains why no trace of the legion's annihilation is found in Britain, and why the empire might have been reluctant to publicize their fate. A defeat against the Parthians, Rome's most dangerous enemy, would have been politically embarrassing and strategically sensitive. It would make sense for official records to quietly omit such a failure. Yet critics point out that Rome usually recorded the redeployment of legions with great care, and the lack of explicit documentation weakens the argument. Moreover, other legions are well documented in the East during this period, but the Ninth's name remains conspicuously absent. Without stronger evidence, the Eastern hypothesis remains tantalizing but unproven. Still, the image of the Ninth marching across the empire, from the misty forests of Britain
to the sun-scorched deserts of Mesopotamia, only to vanish in a clash with the Parthians, has a certain tragic grandeur. It casts their disappearance not as a local tragedy on the fringes of Britain, but as part of the titanic struggle between Rome and its most enduring foe.
The disappearance of the Ninth Legion has fueled centuries of speculation, and where history leaves gaps, myths eagerly step in. Beyond the two leading hypotheses, that the Legion perished in Britain or in the East, scholars, storytellers, and novelists have spun a web of alternative theories, some grounded in historical reasoning, others drifting into legend. One theory suggests that the Ninth was not destroyed at all, but was quietly disbanded. In this version, the Legion had become too weak, undermanned, or politically unreliable to function effectively. Rather than risk their humiliation in battle, Rome may have dissolved the unit and redistributed its remaining soldiers to other legions. This would explain why later records no longer mention them. Yet the silence surrounding such an administrative act still feels unusual, given the Roman passion for record-keeping. Another idea is that the Ninth was transferred to an obscure province and faded away in a slow decline, rather than a dramatic catastrophe. Some point to the frontier along the Danube, where Rome fought constant wars against Dacians, Sarmatians, and Germanic tribes. If the legion was sent there, it might have been worn down in a series of minor battles, losing cohesion until it ceased to exist as a recognizable unit. This explanation lacks the drama of annihilation, but fits Rome's pragmatic approach to military logistics. Then there are the more legendary tales. Medieval writers, looking back on the shadowy fragments of Roman Britain, imagined the Ninth destroyed by supernatural forces or cursed by the gods for their hubris. Folklore in northern England and Scotland occasionally echoes with whispers of ghostly soldiers seen marching through the mist, as if the legion's restless spirits still patrol the borders they once defended. Such stories reveal more about cultural memory than historical fact, but they demonstrate how deeply the mystery of the Ninth resonated across centuries. The disappearance has also inspired modern fiction. The most famous example is Rosemary Sutcliffe's 1954 novel, The Eagle of the Ninth, which popularized the idea that the Legion was annihilated in Scotland. In her story, a young Roman officer ventures beyond Hadrian's Wall to recover the lost eagle standard of his father's legion. While fictional, the novel captured the imagination of generations and cemented the British hypothesis in popular culture. Films, television, and historical novels have since revisited the theme, blurring the line between history and myth. Another enduring legend connects the Ninth's fate to the construction of Hadrian's Wall. Some imagine the wall not as a calculated defensive measure, but as a desperate attempt to keep northern tribes at bay after the catastrophic loss of an entire legion. While historians caution against this oversimplification, the symbolism is powerful, a great wall rising from the landscape as a scar left by the defeat of Rome's finest. Ultimately, these myths and theories reflect humanity's fascination with vanished legions and forgotten battles. We are drawn to mysteries, not just because they lack answers, but because they invite us to imagine. Was the Ninth cut down in a single night of bloodshed, or did they simply fade into administrative obscurity? Did their standards lie buried beneath northern soil, or were they carried east into deserts where no Roman scribe recorded their end? In the absence of certainty, the Ninth Legion belongs not only to history, but also to legend, a ghostly army marching forever in the twilight between fact and fiction.
The disappearance of the Ninth Legion left behind more than a historical puzzle. It created a lasting legacy that continues to shape how we think about the Roman Empire, its limits, and the fragile line between power and vulnerability. For the Romans themselves, the silence surrounding the Ninth was perhaps intentional. The empire prided itself on military strength, discipline, and the idea of invincibility. A lost legion, whether in Britain or the East, challenged that image. By quietly erasing the Ninth from official records, Rome could maintain the illusion that its power was unbroken. In this sense, the legion's disappearance reminds us not only of what was lost, but also of how history itself can be shaped by political necessity. For later generations, the Ninth became a symbol of mystery. The absence of a clear ending allows for endless speculation, and in that absence lies their enduring fascination. Unlike other legions, whose fates are well documented, destroyed in battle, merged with others, or stationed until the empire's decline, the Ninth lingers in the shadows, half forgotten, yet never truly gone. Their story belongs as much to myth as to history. The legacy of the Ninth is also deeply tied to Britain. Hadrian's Wall, still standing in fragments across northern England, is often imagined as a response to the legion's destruction. Whether or not that is historically accurate, the connection between the Ninth and the Wall has become symbolic. The Wall as a line of defense, a statement that Rome had reached its limit. The Ninth's absence is etched into the landscape itself, in stone and memory. In modern culture, the Ninth has taken on a second life through literature, cinema, and historical speculation. Rosemary Sutcliffe's The Eagle of the Ninth transformed their disappearance into a tale of honor, courage, and the search for identity. Her story inspired not only generations of readers, but also films and adaptations that kept the legend alive. Other authors and filmmakers have offered their own interpretations, from tragic defeats in Scotland to secret redeployments in the East. Each retelling reimagines the Ninth in new ways, ensuring they remain alive in cultural memory. The Legion's fate also speaks to a broader truth about empires. No matter how powerful, Rome was not invincible. Legions could vanish, provinces could revolt, frontiers could falter. The Ninth embodies this fragility. Their disappearance reminds us that even the mightiest military machine in history could stumble, and that the silence of lost voices can echo louder than the boasts of victory. Today, historians, archaeologists, and enthusiasts continue to search for answers. Excavations in Britain and beyond still hope to uncover traces of the Ninth, whether in buried artifacts, inscriptions, or mass graves. Each discovery sparks headlines, briefly reviving the ancient mystery. Yet perhaps part of the Ninth's legacy is precisely that we may never know. Mystery itself has become their monument. In the end, the Ninth Legion stands as a paradox, a force that once embodied Rome's power, now remembered for its absence. Their legacy is not in triumph or conquest, but in disappearance, in the enduring human fascination with what is lost, forgotten, and hidden in the mists of time. The Ninth may never march again, but their story continues to inspire, haunt, and remind us that history is not only about what we know, but also about what we may never uncover.